I would like to just, I just want to first introduce Evan Stone, and I would like to invite, he is our co-founder and CEO of E3, and I would like to invite him to just say a few words before we begin today's event.
Thanks so much, April. And so wonderful to see you. When I think about the amazing educators that we have been celebrating across the country this month, you come to mind every time. You've been such a long time, an amazing teacher leader with E3 inside New York City, inside the UFT. And so we're just grateful for you moderating tonight. So thank you so much, April, for being here. Um, Before we bring John in, I just wanted to welcome everybody and say Happy Teacher Appreciation Month. We know that in most places across the country, we celebrate Teacher Appreciation Day or Teacher Appreciation Week. But at E4E, we believe a week is not enough to honor the contributions of educators across the country. And so as we get close to the end of May, which I know for many is that like itchy period of the school year because you're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel and the kids are starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. So thank you for joining us tonight, especially during that time of year. But as we get close to the end of May, we just want to honor educators. And we couldn't think of any better way to honor educators than by sharing this book with you and this conversation with you. And we're going to get into this with John, but when we think about the impact that educators have on children's lives, John's story is both an example of that, and his leadership is an example of that. Um, and so what I hope you take away from the conversation tonight is both um, learning from his story as a student and his story as an educator. And we are at a critical inflection point in our country right now where public education, this thing that we will talk about, the impact it had on Secretary King, on Chancellor King, all of the different titles that he carries. Public education had this critical impact on his life, and now it is under attack. So we were gonna have this conversation. We were gonna end the conversation by asking you all to take action. So I just wanted to frame that up. And John, welcome. But I'm going to let April do an introduction of John, and then we'll dive into the conversation. But thrilled to have you here tonight, John. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. We are just so honored, Chancellor King, just to have you on, especially because it is Teacher Appreciation Month. Although I was telling Evan, it's Teacher Appreciation Month every month. But
Yes,
we're just
amen to that.
we're just so honored to have you. So I just want to take, just this time to really just give you your flowers about all the accomplishments you have done. I've been, thinking about you. I remember the first time I saw you as an E4E member. So I'm just like really honored to just do this for you tonight. So here we go. Chancellor King served in President Barack Obama's cabinet as the 10th U.S. Secretary of Education. Over the course of the extensive and influential career in public education, he has been a high school social studies teacher, a middle school principal, the first African American and Puerto Rican to serve as New York State Education Commissioner, a college professor, and the president and CEO of Education Trust, which is a national education civil rights organization. He's currently the chancellor of the State University of New York, SUNY for most of us, which is the nation's largest comprehensive system of public higher education. By being a national leader in education policy and an author of the deeply moving memoir, Teacher by Teacher, Chancellor King reminds us that the people in our classrooms shape not only individual lives, but entire legacies. So welcome again, Chancellor King. Your story, from enduring profound loss as a child to just leading the national efforts, especially in a time like this, is just a testament to the healing power of schools and educators who show up to teach and transform lives. We're just so honored to have this conversation with you today, especially at this critical moment for public education. So we just heard not too long ago from our CEO, Evan Stone, and we just want to start with a fireside chat between the two of you. And then afterwards, we're going to move to some questions from teachers, some that were pre-submitted, and then we'll set aside some time to highlight just a few from the chat. So everyone that's here, please feel free to share your questions there throughout the conversation. So now I'll hand it back to you, Evan.
Thanks so much, April. And thank you again to all the teachers that are joining us tonight on the end of Teacher Appreciation Month. And John, I was sharing as you were joining that there's probably no better way to honor the impact that teachers have than sharing your book, your story, which I finally finished before we got here tonight. And not only is your story amazing, but it's beautifully written, and I think a terrific testament to educators. So I'm going to jump right in to a few questions that we wanted to ask, but just on a personal note. John, you've been such a great mentor to me and friend to the organization as we have grown and developed. And it is clear throughout this book that your experiences and the way you pay it forward to so many others, whether that's the teachers that you worked with, the students that you worked with, the people that worked under you in the department, or at the state, or at Roxbury Prep, or at all the different levels. You have built this amazing family of people across the country that have just been inspired by your leadership. So you have clearly paid forward the impact that the teachers in this book had on you, to me, and to so many others. So
That's
thank
very kind. Thank you.
you. So in your book, you describe school as a sanctuary, and I know we have a room full of teachers tonight that are hoping they're creating that same sanctuary in their building. And the story begins in a really difficult moment. It starts the morning your mother passed, and with the story of you begging to go to that sanctuary, to go to school. And I think that powerfully illustrates this critical role that schools play in the lives of young people. Often a role we don't think about that school is, that it is this place of safety for so many kids. Can you just tell us a little bit about the teacher who built that sanctuary for you and in the honor of Teacher Appreciation Month, how he helps you sort of feel a sense of belonging and how that shaped your own trajectory into education and later into all the roles you've taken on?
Sure, absolutely. Let me first say, Evan, I just so admire what you and Sydney have built with E4E, and just feel fortunate to have collaborated with you on so many things over the years. And it's also just a joy to be in a room of teachers celebrating Teacher Appreciation Month, but really just celebrating teachers. You know that I. Uh, I really in the book wanted to start out with that day in fourth grade um, because the teacher that I had in fourth, fifth, sixth grade, Mr. Osterwell, is the reason I'm alive today. You know, I grew up in Brooklyn. Both my parents were New York City public school educators their whole careers. Um, But in October of my fourth grade year, my mom passed away. I was 8. And I lived with my dad after that. My dad was very sick with Alzheimer's. And so home was incredibly difficult. And I didn't really have that much of a relationship with my dad. Like, I don't remember ever playing catch with my dad. He was a sort of distant figure. And so when my mom passed, that just my whole world crumbled. And in that moment, the place that I really wanted to be was in Mr. Osterwild's classroom. Part of that was that my mom was the school counselor in my elementary school, PS 276 in Canarsie, and so school felt closer to her. And part of that was that Mr. Osterwild just created this amazing space for me and my classmates to be kids and to have the joy of learning. We read the New York Times every day in his class. We learned the leader and capital of every country in the world. We did productions of A Midsummer Night's Dream, Shakespeare in elementary school. We did a production of Alice in Wonderland, where I was the rose with big red felt petals sticking out of my head. And I remember those things so clearly because his class was a place that was compelling and safe and exciting and interesting every day. We did amazing field trips, Museum of Natural History, the ballet, the cloisters, the Botanic Gardens. I mean, he showed us this whole world beyond Canarsie, Brooklyn, and he also was just genuinely curious about what 8, 9, 10-year-olds had to say about the world, and we felt so cared about it in his class. And that made all the difference for me. He didn't know what was going on, for me at home. He didn't know how sick my father was. He didn't know how chaotic and unstable home was, but he knew to create a space that was powerfully nurturing. And, um, one of the best parts of this whole book process was when we did the kickoff event at the 92nd Street Y a few weeks ago. Mr. Osterwell was there, and it just makes me happy to be able to just say thank you to him for the difference he made.
Such incredible story. I think, we all, when we came into the classroom, I think we all aspired to be a teacher like that, that created
Mm.
that both nurturing classroom and the academic sort of rigor that you described too, and the like academic challenge and stimulation. And I can picture you as a young debater, and I'm having a harder time picturing you as the flower, but I will. Um, so you also, throughout this book and throughout this journey, you talk a lot about educators who gave you space to ask hard questions and speak truth and develop your voice as a leader and as a um and it's clear your uncle also had that role in sort of helping you develop your own voice as a leader. I'm just curious, as you think about those early experiences, what do you think set you on this trajectory of public policy, of being an activist and a leader? You might not describe yourself as an activist, so I won't put that in there, but I see you as an activist that has been driving towards a new vision for public education at all levels. So I'm just curious if you can think a little bit about how those early classroom experiences or the roles that educators play to send you on that aspect of your journey.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is that I feel so intensely grateful for the teachers that made a difference for me. And I recognize that if not for them, I would be dead or in prison, right? And, sometimes I have the experience because I had these difficult things that I went through as a kid, including getting kicked out of high school. I have the experience of people saying to me like, "Oh, you must be so resilient, or you must be special somehow." And I actually find that really problematic because I don't think that I am special. I was lucky. I was lucky that there were the right adults who intervened in my life at the right moment. There are a lot of folks who are sitting in a prison somewhere today who are a lot smarter than me, right? So it's not that I like had some special thing. It's that there were these educators who believed in me and created spaces that allowed me to be successful. When I got kicked out of high school, it would have been very easy for folks to say, here's a Black Puerto Rican kid, family in crisis, no respect for authority. What chance does he have? And they could have written me off, but they didn't, right? There were these teachers and a school counselor and family members who had more faith in me, had more belief in me than I had in myself. And so what drives me towards public policy activism is it shouldn't be like left to chance, right? It shouldn't be just about luck. It should be that every young person gets the kinds of support and opportunities that I got. And that has driven my whole career from the classroom to what I do now as chancellor at SUNY. I am every day thinking about what do I do to create those spaces for other young people.
Yeah. Um, this might build on this a little bit because you do honor teachers throughout this book, and one of the ways you do that is you talk about how hard the job of teaching was. I mean, you have done a lot of
Mhm.
hard things in your career, and you say my first year of teaching remains the hardest job I've ever had, and I feel that my first year was definitely my hardest job, and I'm sure many others on this call can reflect on that first year where we feel like we were given the sort of chance to sink or swim. And then, at Educators for Excellence, we just did some large national polling, and only 19% of teachers across the country say they would recommend this profession to others, this
Mm.
really noble profession that had this profound impact on you and on so many others. Uh, you've had all these different roles. I'm just curious what you think schools and systems can do better, particularly for early career teachers, so that they not only stay but they can thrive, um, and encourage others to join them.
I mean, I think there are probably three things. One is we should pay teachers better, right? And there's variation among states, but at the end of the day, we just do not pay teachers as much as we should to given the work that they do and the role that they play in our society. Two, we should make the working conditions better. And by that, I don't just mean like the buildings better or making sure the copier works, although that's important that the copier works. But I also mean, if you're a teacher in a school where there's 500 students for every one counselor, that's a working conditions problem because it means all the socio-emotional challenges in that classroom are left to you because you don't have the resource of a counselor to support your kids. So we should make the working conditions better. And then the third thing, and this is something I try to work on in my current job and have tried to work on in policy jobs, is we should make teacher preparation and early career support better. And I went to Columbia Teachers College for my master's in teaching. I wanted to get real extensive training before going into the classroom. But my first day in the classroom, I was thinking about how we never talked about classroom management in my whole teacher training experience. Well, as every teacher on this call knows, classroom management is an important thing to know something about. And I had to dig into my, summer camp counselor kind of experiences to figure out how to navigate. We learned a lot about history content. I felt very prepared on Latin American history and 19th century US history, but I did not feel prepared around classroom management. You know, I remember when I had my first parent-teacher conferences, my principal walked up to me and said, "Oh, later this week, parent-teacher conferences. Good luck." And I remember having this thought, what happens in a parent-teacher conference? We'd never talked about parents, not a single time in my teacher preparation program. And yet, parents are a really important partner. And the way I figured out what to do is I thought about the show Growing Pains. And so you have to be of a certain age to know that show. Kirk Cameron was in trouble at school, and his dad, Alan Thicke, the father of Robin Thicke, maybe that makes it a little more contemporary. Alan Thicke had to come into school and meet with the teacher. And so there were two desks pushed against each other, and the teacher had a stack of papers in front of her for the meeting. And so that was my mental image of what parent-teacher conferences were. So I went up to my classroom on that night. I pushed two desks together in the center of the room. I put a stack of papers in front of me. They didn't have anything to do with anything, but I thought, oh, it'll look serious if I have a stack of papers in front of me. And, and then I just had to wing it because I didn't have preparation around that. So I don't think we do a very good job on preparation. And then from an induction standpoint, I wasn't observed a single time in my first year of teaching. There was never another adult in the room, just me and my students. And we do that a lot in schools throughout the country. And it's not surprising then that in the first few years of teaching, folks feel very isolated. And if they don't find that right mentor, often end up leaving the profession. We could be doing so much a better job. We don't do this with doctors.
Yeah.
We take the experience, not only the training, but the early career support. We take it so much more seriously in other fields. And so that is something that I think we could improve from a public policy standpoint. First year teaching is always going to be hard, but it shouldn't be so hard. And there are such clear things we could do to make it better.
Yeah, that resonates. I mean, I was thinking you made me think about like in the medical profession, they do this sort of shelter and support where you're doing the
Mhm.
job, but you are in a sort of controlled environment with a mentor,
Yeah,
but you're still doing the work. You have the hard job, but you have that support. And I feel like in education we do sink or swim. It's like the exact opposite of shelter and support.
that's exactly right.
Uh, So I want to sort of jump into this moment that many teachers on this call are going through. As commissioner, when you were leading in New York State, you did a lot of amazing things. And EFRE worked with you on several of those things, one of which was the rollout of Common Core. And you wrote a lot about the communication roadblocks, you said it was incredibly frustrating to encounter so much confusion and the challenge of communication gaps, not just in New York, but nationally on that issue. 12 years later, New York City and many states across the country are in this massive major curriculum overhaul as they move towards high quality instructional materials. I know at SUNY you're thinking about how you ingrain that into your teacher training programs. In your book, you talked about Orton Gillingham and sort of the need for phonics, and I feel like this is the growth of a lot of that work. But I'm just curious, like what lessons did you learn from Common Core, particularly around how we effectively engage stakeholders and most importantly, how we engage educators in this process that we should be thinking about in New York City or across the country as we try to really shift practice in a way that's led by teachers.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so a couple things I'm very worried about, I'll tell you. One of the things that happened during the Common Core period was, and folks will remember this, every publisher put a sticker on their old curriculum materials that said Common Core, right, or Common Core aligned. They didn't change anything. They just tried to glom on to the Common Core brand. And so it was very hard to figure out during that period, like what is Common Core aligned, high quality curriculum? Where do I find it? How will I know? And now I feel like every state says they're doing science of reading. And some states actually are. You know, Mississippi made this huge bet on science of reading. They changed every single one of their teacher prep programs. They invested in professional development for all of their teachers. They changed curricular materials. You have other states now that say they're doing science of reading. All they did was adopt a bill that said science of reading or make an announcement. There's no substance behind it. So I'm very worried about the gap between policy and substantive change. The other thing I'm very worried about that we really saw in the Common Core period, I think as a country, we underinvested in teacher professional development and support. And it sort of was like, well, we're going to give people standards, we're going to change assessments, and we're going to hope that the whole system moves towards these new standards and assessments. Now in New York, we built Engage New York, which led to a whole set of the early high quality instructional materials like expeditionary learning and Eureka Math, um, and we organized this sort of statewide uh, teacher training strategy with coaches that would train within their district. It wasn't enough, honestly. I mean, it was good. It was better than I think the vast majority of states, but it was not enough. And I talk about in the book that, at the end of the day, these kinds of changes require teachers to change practice in classrooms. And for that to happen, you have to have support and buy-in. And when there isn't support, it's really hard to get the buy-in because then it feels like a mandate, a gotcha, and it doesn't feel good for the folks who are implementing it on the ground. And if folks implementing something on the ground don't like it, it's not going to happen. So I think there are a lot of lessons from that period. Um, and I worry as I look around the country at high quality instructional materials or science of reading efforts that some of those lessons that should have been learned 10 years ago don't, or 15 years ago, don't seem to be um, resulting in better practice today.
Yeah, that resonates. I mean, we're seeing this. I think we're seeing good progress in many of the districts where we work with teachers, and also that it's sort of a one and done in many places, that they haven't built a sort of learning organization of we're going to
Yep.
constantly going in and saying what's working, what's not, how do we tweak it?
Mm-hmm.
That we think these curriculum are perfectly written, we did the training, you got it, now you're like good to go. And um, no other professional environment would operate that way. So uh,
That's right.
that resonates. So you are also in the Obama administration during a sort of a time when politics became more and more partisan. Maybe it always has been, but at least it did. And you've also been a long time advocate for thinking about the role that schools play in our democracy, and in educating students on their civic duties and responsibilities. I think when I think about you reading the New York Times every day, maybe that's the first example of that. Um, and 72% of teachers that we poll across the country agree with that. They think teachers should be playing a role in educating students on their civic duties and responsibilities. But there's also legislation being passed in many places that are making it hard to know if teachers are doing something or saying something that they're not supposed to, or fear of getting in trouble for talking about issues that are impacting people across the country. So I'd love your advice for teachers about how can educators support students to engage critically and courageously with political discourse without imposing their own political viewpoints? How do you
Mm-hmm.
think about that at this time of heightened division?
Yeah. Well, a few things. One, I think, we have to start with giving students a grounding in facts, you know, facts about how government works, facts about our history, including the ugly parts, hard parts of our history. Like, to be an engaged citizen, you have to understand slavery happened. It has long-term consequences in our society, legacies we still experience today, right? So that foundational knowledge is critical for effective citizenship. Second, thinking critically, engaging in debate, grappling with other people's perspectives that are different from your own, uh, disagreeing agreeably, uh, interrogating your own assumptions rather than just waiting for your turn to talk, right? Those are teachable skills. You have to create classroom experiences that inculcate those skills. One experience that my daughters had in their high school in Montgomery County, Maryland, which was really powerful. Their school had a project where you got an assignment as a ninth grader, and you wrote an essay on one side of a controversial issue. And then in 10th grade, you wrote the same essay, but on the other side of the controversial issue. And you had to do your best to marshal the strongest arguments, to respond to counter arguments. And my younger daughter observed, and this really stuck with me, that not only did she learn from having to write from these different perspectives on the same controversial question, but she also learned about herself because she was different writing the same paper a year later. Like, her own thinking had evolved on different issues. But that's a really intentional design to get students um, to really think through listening for the strengths and the arguments of someone else. We have actually a process at SUNY where we've got faculty fellows, our civic education and civil discourse fellows, who are working with their colleagues to think about how do you inculcate these kinds of habits across disciplines so that every class, whether it's science or math or social studies or English or the arts, is preparing students for civic discourse. Um, and I worry that's also something that's, it's not very much attended to in teacher preparation. It's not very much attended to in our assessment system, but it's hugely important.
Yeah. Well, that totally resonates, and I think it's the right time to be having that conversation. I've hogged a lot of your time, and part of the goal here is to bring in educators to ask their questions. So I'm gonna hold my last question in the interest of time, and I'm going to turn it over to April, who's going to bring in some of E4E teachers from across the country. So April, I'll bring it to you.
Thank you. That was such a great conversation, guys, but we're going to keep it going. So we want to bring voices of educators across the country. So I'm just going to invite a few teachers to just ask questions directly.
Great.
I would like to now invite Dr. Danielle Point du Jour. She right now serves as a co-chair of the E4E New York Women of Color Committee, and she would like to ask a question.
So good evening, Dr. King. How are you? Oh, you hear me,
Doing well.
doctor. So I'm Dr. Danielle.
I love
Yes, the
it. I love
King.
it.
Yes,
Good
yes,
to
yes.
see you.
Putting it out there. So I'm so excited and thank you for this time actually that you're sharing with us. My name is Dr. Danielle Pointe-Jour, as April said. So you help shape key education policies. What do you consider your most important policy victory? And what lessons did you learn from that experience that educators like us and advocates can carry forward as we navigate through today's complex challenges?
Mm, mm. It's hard to name one. I will tell you that one that I describe in the book that I feel very, very passionate about is connected to one of President Obama's initiatives called My Brother's Keeper. And it was an initiative, so My Brother's Keeper was an initiative to address the challenges facing particularly boys and young men of color. On the theory that if we did that, because boys and young men of color are so often facing such challenges, that we would actually be able to help everybody by improving the policies. And one of the things that we worked on was trying to undo a very stupid public policy that was adopted in the '94 crime bill, which was banning access to Pell Grants, the federal financial aid for higher education, for folks who are incarcerated. And I say stupid because 95% of the people who are incarcerated are coming home. The evidence is overwhelming that you are dramatically less likely to return to prison if you participate in any educational program while incarcerated. And folks who earn degrees while incarcerated, their recidivism is often in the single digits, right? Because they come home with skills and also a different sense of themselves as a result of that educational experience. But in '94, they banned that as part of the tough on crime kind of craze of the mid '90s. I remember talking to one person who was incarcerated at the time. She said that the guards came and took the books out of the library and said, "You're not going to need these anymore." Right? So it's very reflective of a certain mindset of the mid '90s. So we wanted to fix that. We knew that we couldn't get Congress to change the law, so we used our authority under the Higher Education Act to create a pilot program allowing 65 colleges and universities to use Pell Grants for incarcerated students. And then we used the period once we launched this program, and then even when I left government and I was running a civil rights organization, to get legislators and governors to visit those programs, and also to get folks who'd gone through some of the programs funded by philanthropy in the earlier years to come to Washington to talk with members of Congress to tell their story. And as a result of that pilot and that advocacy, and especially the voices of the folks whose lives were changed by those educational experiences, we were eventually able to get the law changed. And now Pell Grants have been restored. Law change in 2020. Now Pell Grants have been restored for incarcerated students. And we're at SUNY, we're the largest provider of higher education and prison in New York State, and we are working to grow those programs as quickly as we can because it's what education is for. And we called the program in the Obama administration Second Chance Pell, but I often think about, for many of the folks, they didn't get a real first chance because of the circumstances they grew up in. But by giving folks access to education, they can put their lives on a different trajectory.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. And just to put it out there, my dissertation coursework was on improving teacher preparation. So right on, and I
Nice,
appreciate you. You
nice,
spoke to my heart tonight. Thank
nice.
you so much for your time.
Thank you. Great to meet you.
You as well.
Thank you so much. I would like to now invite Eli Levine from E4E's National Teacher Leader Council to ask a question.
Good evening. Thank you for being here and taking our questions.
Of course. Great to see you.
My question, many aspiring teachers are watching the profession and public education come under attack. What would you say to the next generation of public school teachers to give them hope and help them see the value and power of their work?
A couple things. One is I think those of us who care about public education and believe in public education have to be loud about it. We can't be intimidated by the environment that we are living through, and we have to tell the story of the difference that public education makes in people's lives and in communities, and celebrate teachers and lift up teachers. And so we have to try to push back on this climate that feels hostile to public education. But second, when I'm talking to individual teachers, I think one of the things that's hard to see, especially early in your career, is how big an impact you're having that you may not even recognize in the moment. I tell the story in the book of my father's funeral. I was 12. I had this very complicated relationship with my father, as I said, because he was very distant and then very sick. Home was scary because of the Alzheimer's. Some nights he was sad, some nights angry, some nights violent. And so I didn't really know him as the person he was as an educator. And I tell the story of being at his wake, and a man comes up to me who must have been in his 50s, 60s. He'd been my father's student decades earlier. He had not seen him, but he saw the obituary in the newspaper, and he knew he needed to come to the wake because he wanted to tell my father's family what a huge difference my father made in his life. And my father, he was, the first Black principal in Brooklyn. He was a figure who I think set a really important example for students. And so this man told me, I'm 12 years old, and he's just was so earnest in telling me about how much he admired my father and my father's high expectations, and how my father was an example for him in his life. And I knew he wanted to be telling my father, right? But I was grateful for him, especially given my relationship with my father. I was grateful to him for coming to the wake to say that. And I've often in my career have thought about, my father didn't know at the time the impact he was having, but for this man, decades later, it was so palpable. And I think for young teachers, you don't see that, but it's there and it's coming. So when it's when you're 20 years in that you start to have the students come back, or 10 years in, the students come back and tell you, and you understand the impact you've had. So part of it is trying to get folks to take the long view.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, I just want to say I'm really thankful that you got to hear from some of our E4E teacher leaders. We do have some questions that we gonna ask you from the chat. And
Sure.
if you guys have any more questions, please make sure that you put it in the chat. We do have a time for a little bit. So our very first question from the chat, what it says from Kendra. Dr. King, I've heard that you speak a lot about the importance of having a diverse group of teachers in our schools. Why do you think that matters so much for students? And what do you think needs to change to make that more of a reality across the country?
Yeah, such a good question. Look, we had real evidence, right? We know from research that Black students who have a Black teacher in elementary school are more likely to graduate from high school, right? One Black teacher. So we know that from research, but then the question is, well, why is that? And I think about my own experience. I described this in the book. I had my first Black teacher was in 7th grade. Celestine Desajor. She was my 7th grade social studies teacher. And she was amazing. She was also an actress outside of school and a huge personality. And my dad was really sick at that point. I would often sit in class thinking about what home was going to be like that night, worried. But in her class, I was just focused on school and on the projects we were working on. We did this project, Aztec newscast, and I was the Aztec sportscaster. And I remember I wanted to be the best Aztec sportscaster there had ever been, And she was someone who I connected with, who I looked up to, who I could see myself in and could identify with. And I had a teacher, a high school social studies teacher, Mr. Rogers, who also was just such a role model. He didn't even know, but he was a Black man I could look up to and say that's the kind of person I want to be. It's the kind of life I want to have. So I think that is very important. I think it's important for white students to see teachers of color too. I have a friend who would say it's a little bit harder to be racist if you have a Black calculus teacher. It's not impossible, but it's a little bit harder, right? And it's sort of like, yeah, exposure to folks in the classroom who are showing you love, care, and academic opportunity, that helps build cross-racial relationships. So I think it's better for students, better for society. In terms of what we need to do to get there, I mean, we need to be much more intentional about pipelines, and that's gotten harder with some of the stuff coming out of the federal government, but we've really got to be intentional about identifying students in high school and early in college to get them on the pathway to teaching. I was with a group of students who were involved in the My Brother's Keeper program in Yonkers yesterday, and they had some 11th graders who are mentoring 5th and 6th graders, right? And those are young people who now have a sense of what they could be as mentors and maybe as educators, right? So that we need more of that. And then we need to combat what I've written about as the invisible tax on educators of color, right? Which is, and it takes a lot of forms, but sometimes if you're the one Latina teacher in a school, folks are saying, oh, well, we've got parent conferences. Can you translate? We're sending this notice home. Can you translate? And it's not that you don't want to, but that is a tax. That's something while other people are grading, they're preparing for the next day, or they're home, you're doing this other thing. And is it recognized? Is it appreciated? I talk to a lot of Black male teachers who get asked to be the disciplinarian in schools. And again, it's not necessarily that you don't want to step up to support kids who are struggling socio-emotionally, behaviorally, but is that recognized? Is it valued? Are you also valued for your academic excellence in the classroom? Are you also given the opportunity to lead on curriculum development projects and, or are you pigeonholed because of your identity? So that is a big challenge. It really requires leaders to be very thoughtful about how they support all of their teachers.
Thank you so much. I mean, I have one more question, but I just want to say that one of the things that you just talked about, just about the MBK program, the MSBK program, in my district, that was one of the things we saw that was a need, and we wanted to like bring it back to life. And I think it kind of goes with the next question that I'm going to ask you because it has to do with funding, the climate that we're in right now. So another question from the audience was news about the vision for dismantling the Department of Education has rattled many of us. Our survey found 70% of teachers oppose this. Could you speak to the critical role the department plays and why is it so important to preserve it?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm heartbroken about what the administration is trying to do, and I'm heartbroken on a very personal level because I worked with folks who work at the department, and I know them to be committed civil servants who have given their lives to try to make education better. So it pains me to see them treated so cruelly. But from a public policy perspective, it's a disaster, right? The education department, the roots of it, the roots of the federal role in education really are in the civil rights movement. You think about the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, right? Why 1965? Well, because President Johnson saw education as the path to opportunity, the path to a more just society. And they knew that if they tied federal funding to implementing civil rights law, you could get folks to implement civil rights law. Why did they need to do that? Well, you had states and districts that were resisting enforcing civil rights law and enforcing the Supreme Court's decision in Brown versus Board of Education. I often point out to folks, you think about that painting, the famous painting, Norman Rockwell painting of Ruby Bridges. And immediately that image is so iconic, comes to mind, right? And you see Ruby Bridges there in the center, but who's around Ruby Bridges? US Marshals, because the federal government was required to be there to actually make sure that Ruby Bridges would get access to her civil rights in schools. Louisiana and New Orleans did not want to protect those rights. So that's the history. So I'm worried about a rejection, a dismantling of that history. And then there are some very practical things. What does the department do? Sends money to states and districts for vulnerable students. Title I for low-income students. Title III for English learners, right? And those are districts that can't easily replace those dollars. What else does the department? The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act funding that pays for services for students with disabilities. We can't afford to lose those dollars. What else does the department do? The FAFSA, the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, the Pell Grant Program, the Federal Student Loan Program that makes college possible for low and middle income Americans. No department? Who's doing that work? Who's going to make sure those resources are there for students? What else does the department do? Civil rights enforcement. If you are a victim of discrimination on the basis of race or sex or disability, departments where you go to get your rights protected and vindicated. Where are those families going to go? Families of kids with disabilities who aren't getting the services they're entitled to, where are they going to go? And the last thing I'll say about the department, data, research, the National Assessment of Educational Progress. It's the place where we figure out where are we succeeding, where are we struggling, where do we need to intervene. We take all of that away, we're flying blind. So the department plays these vital roles, and the administration says, "Oh well, other people will do it." Well, which other people? There are half as many people working at the department today as there were on January 20th, and that's bad for the country. And my hope is that Congress will step up, but I haven't seen it yet. But I'm hopeful.
Yes, I'm hopeful too, trying. We do have one more question from the chat. Having worked in education at every level, how do you define success and what do you see as the keys to
Mm,
student success?
mm. What drives me is trying to create schools, whether it's at the K-12 or higher ed level, that give students access to a fulfilling life. right? And so that's, you know, college and career readiness is a part of that, right? The academic skills, reading, math, science, the social studies, right? That's part of it. You need to have the skills so that you can get a good job. Absolutely. But that's not all of it. Evan talked about citizenship and civic participation. Part of a fulfilling life is being part of a community and contributing to that community. So you need to not only know about civics, but you have to practice the habits of democracy, of civic participation. But even that's not all of it. Part of a fulfilling life is finding joy in the arts. It's finding joy in the outdoors. It's appreciating nature. It's appreciating music. And so we also have to, I think, create opportunities in schools to help students also find that get exposed to the things that allow you to lead a fulfilling life. And even more than all of those things, part of a fulfilling life is relationships with other people. And it's one of the reasons I'm very excited about the governor's bell-to-bell cell phone ban in New York, Governor Hochul's bell-to-bell cell phone ban, because yeah, cell phones are a distraction from academics and a distraction from learning, but they're also a distraction from relationship building. When I go into elementary or middle school at lunchtime and see students who, instead of talking to each other, are just staring down at their device, it's heartbreaking. That's not what childhood is supposed to be. So we've got to, I think, make schools also a place where we build and cultivate young people who can form meaningful relationships.
Wow. Everything you said, I think most of us that are on the line pretty much agree with you. So I just want to take the time to just thank you again, Chancellor King. You've shown us that educators are healers, builders, and change agents. Public education, when it's done right, is one of the most powerful tools that we can use to build just a just and equitable future. So we're just so grateful for your leadership, your example, and just your unwavering belief in the power of teachers to transform this country. So, just like your reflections today and just your memoir, which I know everybody's going to run out and read or get it on Audible or what have you, you just remind us in your memoir that education is just not policy. It's deeply personal. So I think that that's what we're going to definitely, I know for me, I'm taking that away from me, away with me tonight. So thank you once again for joining us this evening. So in true E for E fashion, we had a great conversation. We heard a lot from our teacher leaders and teachers in the audience. So we are going to really just take this time to ask or to just kind of do what we were just talking about, advocate for change, be a change agent. And so in E for E fashion, we're going to ask you if you can just do one meaningful change today. So, with talking about the dismantling of the Department of Education and cuts to vital funding, it's our teachers and students who are going to be at risk. So, in the chat, you're going to find a link where you can quickly contact your legislator to protect mental health funding for students. And this is just one action we can take, teacher by teacher, to make a real difference. We also want to just thank you all for the incredible ways that you're leading. Like I said, thank you for joining us for a Happy Teacher Appreciation Month, even though it's every month. But just the ways that teachers have been in your classrooms and beyond, the work that you guys do is just phenomenal. So just keep your head up. Couple of things I just want to say before we end. Just please mark your calendars for a special celebration on June 17th, 2025 at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we're going to all come together to celebrate our teachers, leaders from the school year and honor a few standout educators with the E for E's Sydney Morris Activist of the Year Award. So we just can't wait to celebrate your impact and close out the year with joy and appreciation. So once again, Chancellor King, thank you for joining us, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening. And don't forget, please do this action. Talk to your legislators. we got to advocate for ourselves and for our students. Emmy, you have anything more to say?
Thanks
just
so
wanna-
much.
Yeah, thank you, April. Thank you, Secretary King. Thank you, John. Always love hearing your story and your lessons for all of us. So happy Teacher Appreciation Month, everybody, and we'll talk again soon.
Take
Bye.
care.